everybody. I kind of geek out on language a lot for a variety of different reasons. It's at once one of the strangest things about being human, or the kind of animal we are. And it's also super ordinary. Right? We do this all the time. But I'm inclined to be very curious about all the histories and how this came to be, both in terms of our species, right, as language users, and as individuals who uniquely acquire and express a broad array of linguistic conservations, habits, motifs. And of course, I'm specifically interested in places where tools we use, somehow our relationship with them over time, it overcomes our intelligence rather than, enhancing it. As we imagine these astonishing capacities we have with language, we imagine they should advance us, and in a variety of peculiar ways they do, but at the same time, I think, for many of us at least, we have a kind of user level access to the assets from which language arises. And so we're very often in the ways that language predisposes us to make relatively clumsy moves with its incredibly powerful assets. The result is that we misframe the world and ourselves, thought and opportunity, threat, all of the things, beauty, the things that we would hope language would assist us in some deep way in appreciating and relating with and noticing and being aware of. And there's all kinds of little problems in the language situation for each unique speaker and for each unique language. And I think some are far less cognitively oppressive than English. In that they contain richness and depth and ambiguity that English has become well used to amputating, right? Getting rid of that sort of uncertain, cloud of possible ways of seeing or thinking. And so in the end, the way that we use English, though it may not necessarily innately be this way, something about the structure of the language, I think, inclines us toward its most dangerous inclinations. Oh wait, yeah, just said inclines us. Its most dangerous there's a way to get involved in a system when every time you reiterate the system, you lose degrees of liberty, right? And often in such systems, those degrees of liberty are relative to the aspects of awareness we would ordinarily employ to detect the problem, right? This is analogous to, in a way, to HIV going after the immune system, which I think is a woefully incomplete description of what HIV does or is. Nonetheless, it's useful as a toy. So yeah, HIV goes after the thing that detects these problems, right? And responds to a broad array of problems in the body, or transition states, or however we want to think of them. And English isn't necessarily innately this way, but it easily collapses toward that under certain circumstances that we are inclined to generate and enhance, to develop, right? So we're developing a de-developing impetus inside our language use, it seems to me. And there's lots of other things going on there too, right? It's not the only thing that's happening. But this is something that concerns me because it affects me. I'm an English speaker. It's the only human language that I speak. Though I know, a smattering about other languages. And today I was thinking about ideas, generalized ideas. And one of the things that got me thinking about it was when I was listening to Joscha Bach, I think is his name. He's a computationalist, wildly brilliant theorist, and I actually don't know a lot about him other than having listened to him in this podcast. Well, that's a lot of horse manure. I guess I mean that in more than one way. So, he was saying, he got to talking about gods, very interestingly. And one of the things that he said that was quite startling in its simplicity was that gods are selves that distribute over populations, right, or something to this effect. So gods are distributable selves. And it's a very radical and simple idea that's not without merit. Ideas themselves are somewhat like this, right? They have the propensity or the capacity to rapidly distribute over populations. And so too language habits. Like saying like, and like using filler words. We acquire these habits almost unconsciously from our immersion with other speakers of our language. And with what we read and media and so on. The water sound is nice. So I was thinking about awareness, and that actually the word is deceptive because it refers to the progenitor of something which is never found by itself, right? In the sense that awareness is always awareness of something as someone, somewhere, somewhen, somehow. And so, though we can speak of awareness generally, it's deceptive to think of it as, in the way that I think the casual person might, to think of it as a thing. It's not a thing. It's sort of a domain of origin from which unique expressions of its possibilities emerge, even in me, moment to moment, now as I walk and speak and consider, my plan. I read something in a book by a Dawnist called Sufism and Surrealism today. I was reading a chapter that was talking about love and mystery and theophany and the feminine, the unobtainable, the dance of the heart with the nature of origin and divine. And somewhere in there he said something like, in this sense, time is no longer chronological. Time becomes what we are in it. And that's an entirely different aspect of... And he speaks of temporalities as well, which I find useful and interesting, although very briefly. And it's like this with awareness, right? Awareness is... It isn't simply... there's a way of speaking about awareness that points at something we might imagine as the unexpressed potential that is normally very expressed in a much more structured and distracting and maybe even kind of oppressive way. Though it has lots of flavors, right? Not just a few, and it's often multiple flavors at once. But we use this word awareness sometimes to point at the before of the collapse of consciousness into and toward thought and identification and persona and role and activity and so on and so forth, like as if we were referring to no, what am I going to say? I'm stuck. There's no way to refer meaningfully to this that I can think of. The undifferentiated essence, which might sometimes be referred to as, the Godhead, or perhaps Satori, awakening, where the processes, if there are such things, if I can speak in this way, involved in awareness, sort of are retracted up into their origin, and of course, like, the self disappears and various other things can happen if we're just talking about this, which is a little bit weird because it's very difficult to talk meaningfully about. Well, certainly with direct language, it's extremely difficult to talk meaningfully about such things, or even around such matters. Because for most of us, awareness is structured, so it's awareness of something, right? And so it doesn't really exist. It's not a thing. And, we might say it's a process or something like this. We can take pokes at the right category, but without it, there are no categories, so we have a bit of a problem. But there are many things that are like this. There's really no such thing as love, for example, in general, right? Love is always unique to those experiencing and involved and so on and so forth. It's always specific. It's always love of someone, love for some way, some dream, some place, some animal, some time, some food, right? And kindness. There's no such thing as... kindness doesn't exist. Kindness is always a specific, relationship. a specific exchange. Right? General kindness isn't probably actually very kind, because actual kindness has this unique quality of presence, yeah? And being embodied and being shared, and there's a bunch of beautiful aspects in the constellation of a moment of kindness that are not captured by the idea of kindness at all. But particularly, the generalization doesn't point, it points toward a class of specific things that have something general in common, but there is no kindness. And these things, love and kindness and other weirder things like government, don't really want to go there. I'll probably resist it. It's very ambiguous what they refer to when they're decontexted. And there's this propensity for in human culture, and particularly in modernity, to look at sort of, graphs and statistics and pick out the mean or the average and project that average as an expectation over people's minds or behavior or ideas, or the idea of what's not normal, right? And there's some good in the norms, there's some relative value there. Wouldn't want to throw them away. But a lot of what's truly good has nothing to do with norms or averages. And also, if we're using norms or averages to look at populations, we're going to see often, especially depending on how what our motive is, we're going to see the worst common denominator, and then many of us anyway, will project that onto whole populations. Right? So we have these weird impediments in our cognitive habits as modern people, impediments that are extremely common. Everyone has unique versions, and some have seen through some of these, and maybe some of us are working toward that. I am, because it fascinates me. There's a bunch of interesting old problems here that I'm in love with. And mysteries. Now, of course, I can use awareness to refer to the general. See, this is the other thing. Words have many senses, but in the commons, when we hear them employed, they're often kind of decontexted and just employed as a placeholder for something that could have been, meaningfully explored or, uncovered, discovered, invented. And there is a real problem with generalizations and taking the mean or the average and thinking, well, that's how it's supposed to be. When those statistics have nearly nothing to do with any actually specific situation, and we know of no other form of situation. It's not like there are average situations, that just conform to the mean. And where there are, it's still suspiciously unique. We can say that the same superficial thing is happening around my house at 8 a.m. in the morning outside with the traffic and so on and so forth. I can make a generalization about it. And even though it's true that Joe Thomas will drive by my house between 8:40 and 8:59 in the morning, if that's true, it's always unique, right? So the superficial likeness to the model that we've chosen can be blinding. And language has a way, when used, when we're not trained to understand its actual complexity and dangers and opportunities, of structuring the world of available experience in a way that becomes narrower and narrower as languages grip on our minds and cultures and so on. All of the things we're involved in. It's not just language, of course, but as these things sort of crystallize, right, we tend to crystallize with them toward a narrower and narrower bandwidth of experience and presence in experience. Ways of being aware, purposes for which we will become aware. You can see this sort of tragic extinction event if you just watch children, mature. You'll see them lose all these degrees of liberty, and they'll gain some degrees of structured skill in the process, but that trade-off is unnecessary. You can easily have both of those things. You don't have to get rid of the wild, sort of half-feral, insightful, playfully imaginative, profound, embodied presence of the child to get structured skill. That's a myth. Unfortunately, this is, I think happens to a great many of us, and to most of us as we age, we, unless we're both skillful and lucky, we will lose most of our cognitive and relational and creative diversity as we get older. We'll collapse at some point, toward narrower and narrower expressions. Or at least, this is something many people experience, and it's something that's frightening. It's a tragic thing. And it's probably primarily, there are, all kinds of variables involved, but the ones that we affect and can change, go into the darkness here for a moment. These we should have access to together, right? We should be able to learn to see together into the opportunities and bizarre contortions that language subjects us to in common modern culture. And generalizations are one of the problems that actually bothers me a lot. For some reason, I've got a pet peeve about them, which probably reveals more about me than it does about language or generalizations. But yeah, I've got a bit of a feather in my tail over that one. It's been an interesting and amazing day. I watched, and I wanted to film it, but I felt too respectful, and also I thought it'll be better if I'm just present. But there was a young German man, maybe 37, 38. And his two tow-headed daughters, one about 9 and one about 5 or 6. And obviously the guy's a climber, and they had thrown an anchor band way up into this old eucalyptus tree with a string. And when they were taking the band, when they wanted to bring the band down, the string got all tangled, probably a good 45 feet off the ground, way up in this really old uke. So this guy and his daughters, the guy essentially risked his life to grab the string and the band off the tree. And his oldest daughter was anchoring him. She was playing rope anchor. It was a little thing, and she took it very seriously, and it was a beautiful but also confusing adventure, because I just thought it was great to see them out having this adventure together, where they're gonna, I couldn't tell actually in the beginning who was going up the tree, the kids or the dad. But the dad went up. And it was just kind of mind-boggling. Like, the guy wasn't really properly equipped to be climbing the tree, even though he had, ropes and belts and stuff like this. He didn't have a helmet. And if he had taken, it was a pretty sketchy route he plotted up that tree. And if he had taken a fall, there's a couple of places where the protection he had set up would not have functioned well by any, way that I could see. So I was very concerned. And there was a lot at stake, right? There's, the daughters, and I had to consider whether my role as an observer, whether it would be better if I just didn't, hang out, so that he wouldn't have the additional stress of being observed. But I talked to them and asked if I could watch and stuff, and he went up the tree and he got that strap down. But there were a couple points there where it was really touchy. And, I'm watching the children and their father in the tree, and it's a pretty serious thing going on there. And the dad's trying to kind of keep it playful, but frankly, there was sort of I was getting a kind of a mixed message, right? Like, one of the messages was, you can be intrepid and do amazing things. Things you'd never expect that you're capable of doing. Cool message. But the other message was weirder, and it seemed a bit too extreme. The thing about retrieving the strap from the tree, and I don't know what the justification is. It could just be we don't leave things in trees, right? Okay, good point. There's a bunch of string up there. Bird could get tangled in it. But the intensity of the father's drive was at once admirable and seemed maybe half crazy too, right? Like, this is a mixed message to give your daughters, that it's okay to risk your life for a little band of, climbing material and some string up in a tree. Now, of course, that's just that's just how I was in the situation. I was kind of going like, I don't know what would the children, what message will they take from this? But I'm thinking like me and an adult, and they're in their child mind, so the chance of me getting a good, read on what they're thinking or what they'll make of it's not great. But I couldn't help thinking a little bit like a family therapist, right? Like, what's the dad, what's he modeling to his daughters? And there were some good things in there, but there were also some kind of like crazy overdrive, right? So I was nervous, but it was a beautiful thing to observe, a family sort of participating in this big adventure about a climbing strap way up in the tree. And so my awareness was awareness of that, right? My palms were sweaty. That was, I was engaged when he was up in the tree. Now the evening has come. So many other things I've been thinking of sharing about, particularly sort of osmosis of how we absorb essences from each other in groups, even over short periods of time. But I think it's going to have to wait. For now, I'll sign off. Bye-bye, everybody.